The ultimate goal behind everything I strive for has always been simple, yet deeply meaningful: to make the world a better place, one individual at a time. I want to improve lives in a way that leaves a lasting mark, no matter how small it may seem to many people. Eustace Conway was more than just a man. He was the living embodiment of the mountain men spirit. Admirers often called him a modern-day Daniel Boone, the kind of person who could step into the wilderness and claim it as his own. But what if this image of mastery and control was only part of the story? What if the flawless persona that people saw on television masked a reality far more complicated, and perhaps even unsettling? There were those who tried to warn others about Eustace, but their words often went unheard. Maybe now it's time to finally pay attention. Eustace Conway's personality has always been a point of fascination, and sometimes controversy. He lived entirely off the land in a way most people only read about in adventure books. Could spark a fire by rubbing two sticks together, where the skins of animals he had hunted and eaten, push his body to extremes few could endure. At one point, he walked the entire Appalachian Trail, wearing little more than a loincloth for much of the journey, surviving almost exclusively on what he could hunt or gather along the way. In another remarkable feat, he rode on horseback across the United States in just 103 days, setting a world record. These weren't tales from a novel or scenes from a movie. They were Eustace Conway's real-life achievements. Everything about him was as raw, unfiltered, authentic as the wilderness he called home. While the modern world busied itself with glowing screens and endless technological comforts, Eustace chose a path most would find unthinkable. His days were filled with dirt under his boots, icy winds against his face, and the constant rhythm of life in direct contact with nature. But beneath the rugged exterior was a life of hardship that few ever witnessed. The pioneers of old, but that dream came at a cost. It demanded more than most people could ever give. His lifestyle was so demanding and disciplined that it often drove people away, including many of the women who once loved him. Romantic partners often arrived full of excitement, imagining a life of adventure and boundless freedom. What they actually encountered was grueling labor, plain and sometimes scarce food. Hands blistered from endless work, frozen toes in the winter, swarms of biting insects in the summer, and an isolating solitude that proved too much to bear. And it wasn't just romantic partners who left. Even the students who came to Turtle Island, genuinely eager to learn from a man they saw as the last true frontiersman, often departed sooner than expected. Many lasted weeks, some only days. A few didn't survive the first full day. They arrived imagining themselves living the dream, but reality set in quickly. The tasks were physically exhausting: hauling manure, chopping mountains of firewood, and following Eustace's strict rules. Disillusionment spread fast, and many walked away calling him harsh, overly critical, and far from the image they had built in their minds. On the History Channel's Mountain Men, Eustace appeared to be the face of freedom, proof that a person could live far from the noise of modern life and thrive purely on willpower and skill. Viewers saw him gliding through forests on horseback, swinging his axe with effortless precision, and moving as if the wilderness was his natural stage. He seemed calm in every storm, confident in every challenge. But what if that wasn't the complete picture? Those who knew him up close often insisted there was more, a side of Eustace that the cameras didn't capture. Eustace was undeniably unique. His eyes were so sharp they could spot a deer long before it sensed him. His balance was so perfect he could sprint across a log over a river without faltering. His reflexes were so fast it seemed nothing could surprise him. He lived with an unwavering belief that anything was possible if he set his mind to it, and every day he carried himself as though he had something to prove. But for him, living off the land wasn't simply about survival. It was about saving a country he believed was drowning in convenience, distraction, and waste. He saw himself as a guardian of a vanishing way of life. The History Channel's Mountain Men, which first aired on May 31st, 2012, follows people who have chosen to live far from modern society, surviving only on what nature provides. Among its most unforgettable figures is Eustace Conway, who lives deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina on a tract of land he named Turtle Island. There, he welcomes students eager to learn wilderness survival, teaching everything from shelter building to food gathering. He also earns a living through traditional methods, like cutting firewood with hand tools. But life at Turtle Island wasn't always as serene as it appeared. Eustace faced serious challenges at one point. A lien was placed on his land, forcing him into a legal battle to keep the property he had worked decades to build. Through it all, his close friend Preston Roberts stood by his side, both on the show and in life. Have you ever wondered what it would truly feel like to abandon all the comforts of modern life? No technology, no grocery stores, no quick fixes, and depend entirely on the land? This is the reality men like Eustace Conway, Tom Moore, and Marty Mayaroto have embraced, devoting their entire lives to living as naturally as possible. But this life is anything but simple. From the rugged mountains of North Carolina to the Yak River in Montana, where winters last 7 months, and the frozen reaches of northern Alaska, they face some of the harshest environments in America. Nature offers no safety net. Mudslides can destroy everything in seconds. Trees fall without warning, storms strike without mercy, and predators are always on the prowl. Survival requires constant vigilance, and the greatest challenge is preparing. For winter, failing to store enough food and supplies could mean the difference between life and death. Eustace wasn't just a man of survival, he was a builder of dreams. Turtle Island Preserve began as a vision and became a living reality. He described himself as a dreamer who placed foundations under his visions, someone who not only imagined but acted. He valued the unique story of every person he met, believing that diversity was something to be celebrated. His teachings revolved around the idea that humans and nature are bound together in the same circle of life. Inspired by Native American traditions, he believed harmony with nature was still possible in the modern age. His teaching style was entirely hands-on. He would give his students direct involvement in untold skills, from stone tool-making to fire starting. His lessons emphasized how humans fit into the larger web of life, a truth often forgotten in modern living. To him, Turtle Island was more than a place. It was an opportunity for people to reconnect with what truly mattered: food, water, shelter, and clothing. Life there was a mix of hard work and quiet wonder. Students drove horse-drawn buggies, plowed gardens, cooked stinging nettle, and watched dawn light touch the treetops. They lifted stones to uncover hidden stream life, watched spiders spin webs, and stood silently as butterflies fluttered past. For Eustace, these experiences revived something long buried under the noise of modern life, an awareness that nature isn't just background scenery, but a living presence that matters deeply. But as Turtle Island grew, so did the pressures. In June 2013, Eustace sat outside the horse barn on a warm day, contemplating the trouble ahead. The preserve had been ordered closed for failing to meet health and safety standards. For Eustace, the situation was maddening because it represented the collision of two worlds, the natural world he cherished and what he called the plastic imitation world, where most people lived. That fragile border between them was now under threat. When he first bought 107 acres in 1987, he envisioned Turtle Island as a wild, untouched sanctuary amid a world paved with concrete and noise. He had been living this way since leaving his suburban home at 17, dedicating over 3 decades to teaching others how to live simply and sustainably. But by 2013, even he had changed. The buckskins had been replaced by jeans and t-shirts. The quiet sounds of nature were joined by the buzz of chainsaws. Students learned not just primitive survival, but also modern scavenging skills like dumpster diving because, as Eustace put it, surviving today requires more than just the old ways. And then there were the cameras. For 2 seasons, Eustace had been a central figure on Mountain Men, a television presence for millions, but the reality of his life was far more complex than what viewers saw on screen. Eustace admitted with a laugh that his lifestyle was full of contradictions. "I think television's terrible," he once said, calling it a paradox that he appeared on it at all. Yet he acknowledged that being on TV was part of a delicate balancing act. Maintaining Turtle Island's existence required money, and that meant making compromises. The preserve depended heavily on interns and apprentices who exchanged labor for knowledge. It also relied on a tax-exempt status within a governmental system that Eustace openly despised. And it needed a steady stream of paying visitors to keep things running. Unfortunately, this was exactly where the fragile balance between his old-world ideals and the modern world finally began to break apart. It all started when someone filed a complaint. It's about unapproved construction on Turtle Island. Soon after, without any warning, officials from Watauga County's Planning and Inspection Department arrived at the property. What they found shocked them. Scattered across the preserve were dozens of structures, cabins, barns, kitchens, and more, all built without a single permit. The county attorney issued an ultimatum, giving Eustace 3 options: bring every building up to state safety standards and obtain proper permits. Hire an expert to prove the structures already met those standards, or tear them all down. What followed was no longer just a legal issue about building codes. It became a philosophical battle between 2 different ways of living. Eustace called it real life, while others saw it as simply defying the rules. This fight threatened everything he had spent decades building. The dispute dated back to 2012, when County Planning Director Joe Furman received an anonymous phone call. About a week later, an unmarked envelope arrived. Inside was a crudely drawn but surprisingly detailed color-coded map that pointed out buildings, road grading, and wiring, allegedly all done without the proper permits, inspections, or engineering. That single envelope was the spark that lit a chain of events Turtle Island had never faced before. The question was, how could this happen to a man who had built his entire life around living in harmony with nature? The answer lay partly in location. Unlike many other mountain men featured on television who live high in the Rockies or deep in Alaska, Eustace was never completely isolated. Turtle Island sits close to the Tennessee border. Just a few miles from Boone, Lively County seat with about 17,000 residents, a number that nearly doubles when Appalachian State University, the same school Eustace once attended, is in session. Beyond the gravel road that leads to the preserve, there are modern homes tucked among wooded lots. And the Blue Ridge Parkway runs close enough that visitors can sometimes hear the faint hum of passing cars. But once you pass through the gates of Turtle Island, it's a different world entirely. Crossing a shallow stream that dances over smooth stones, the road opens into a wide meadow where history seems to breathe. Around you stand a blacksmith shop, an open-air kitchen and dining hall, a corn crib, and other outbuildings that tell the story of old ways still alive. At the center is perhaps the most striking sight, a massive cantilevered barn, built from dovetailed logs and topped with 5,000 hand-split shingles, each moss-covered and weathered with age. The name Turtle Island was chosen for a reason. It comes from a Native American creation story about a great turtle that saved life from a devastating flood by carrying the world on its back. Conway's website described it this way: "We are an island of wilderness in a sea of development and destruction." But while this vision inspired many, it didn't impress county officials. After that first inspection, Furman said talks with Eustace broke down quickly. On September 19th, officials returned with a warrant and sheriff's deputies. They began with Eustace's own home and found it lacked even the minimum water and sewer connections required by law. They noted that all the buildings were made from wood milled on-site, rather than the graded and marked lumber required by building codes. As inspectors looked deeper, the list of violations grew. They discovered solar panels powering Eustace's, a small office, and a micro-hydroelectric plant built by Appalachian State students that powered a workshop. But the wiring and junction boxes didn't meet code. They saw a wood stove with a chimney vented beneath a metal roof instead of through it. They found public outhouses in several buildings resting on stacked stone foundations without proper anchoring. In a 78-page report, building consultant W. White issued a serious warning. Many of the structures were not structurally sound. Wrote that the property, in its current state, presents a hazard to the safety of anyone near any of the structures. He even recommended a court order to vacate Turtle Island to protect the public and interns. But Eustace and his supporters saw things very differently. To them, this was about more than building codes. It was a fight over values. Eustace asked the question that went to the heart of the matter. How could I teach primitive living in modern, cookie-cutter buildings that strip away everything my life stands for? The warnings about Eustace's life not being as simple as it looked didn't start with the building dispute. The first sign had come years earlier, long before the TV cameras arrived. In August 2005, an accident occurred on his land, one that would haunt him for years. Kimberly Baker, a 28-year-old from Wilmington, came to Turtle Island with the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Program. During orientation, one of Eustace's staff pulled out a sling to demonstrate stone hurling, an ancient skill meant to impress visitors. In an instant, something went wrong. The rock flew backward and struck Baker in the eye, permanently blinding her on that side. Baker sued and eventually settled with two of Conway's staff members for $400,000. But Eustace himself wasn't free from responsibility. In 2009, he agreed to pay her $75,000 and promised to mortgage part of his land within a year to cover the payment. When that deadline passed, Baker sued again for breach of contract. It wasn't until April 2012, just as Mountain Men was filming its early episodes, that Conway finally paid. During this time, Conway continued building the life millions would later see on TV. When I go out in public, I try to look like a wild guy who just came off the mountain, he told author Elizabeth Gilbert in The Last American Man. I know it's an act. I'm a showman. I give people the picture of how I wish I were living. What else can I do? People expect it. If he admitted it was partly an act, how much of what audiences saw was the full truth? When Turtle Island was flagged for building code violations, public backlash was fierce. Watauga County offices were flooded with letters accusing officials of attacking a man's way of life. One petition even asked, "Are government officials upset that someone can survive without them?" The uproar grew so loud that lawmakers stepped in. The Republican-led legislature introduced a bill to exempt primitive camps and farms from strict building codes. Structures like barns, sheds, and outhouses would no longer need to meet modern standards. Governor Pat McCrory signed the bill into law on June 12th. By the end of that month, Turtle Island was open again. Conway was back in business, but that didn't mean the warnings were over. On a humid summer day, Conway stood in the breezeway of his horse barn, speaking to a group of campers and interns. The smell of wood smoke and stewing cabbage lingered in the air while chickens scratched at the dirt. It looked timeless, but Conway knew the truth. His deal with the History Channel kept him from sharing specifics. But he admitted, life out here isn't as dramatic as they want it to be. Eustace always told people that if they truly wanted to live closer to the land, they needed to start with the basics: food, water, clothing, and shelter. And they should start small. If you've never built anything before, don't start with a house, he advised. Build a doghouse, then move up from there. He never believed in throwing people into the wilderness unprepared. Instead, he taught them step by step. He often said most people are so disconnected from reality that they don't know where their clothes come from, how a sewing machine works, or even how to thread a needle. You could knot a thread without looking something. He'd been doing since he was 4 years old. For those wanting to grow their own food, he suggested planting just 5 radishes first. That small harvest might seem trivial, but once you taste them, he said, you'll want more, eventually planting lettuce, onions, tomatoes, and creating a full garden. As for Turtle Island, it was never fully self-sufficient, and Eustace was honest about that. They bought hay for the horses, used fuel for vehicles, and purchased some food from stores. This wasn't failure, it was reality. Once someone accused him of cheating after seeing him use a chainsaw to cut firewood. He simply explained that this wasn't a survival game, it was his home. He'd cooked and heated with wood for 30 years. And while he had axes and saws for when fuel might run out, there was no need to suffer when a chainsaw worked better. Eustace doubted most Americans would ever give up modern comforts entirely. Instead, he believed people could blend the old and the new. He had lived without electricity for 30 years, inviting thousands to try the same, yet not one of them gave it up after returning home. That didn't discourage him. Instead, he shifted. his focus. If they won't stop using electricity, he said, then I'll show them how to make it in a way that doesn't destroy the earth. That's why he built a small hydroelectric system on Turtle Island.